Okay, some quick responses from our panellists who've joined us. Julie Mercer from Deloitte, Alex Proudfoot from the independent HE sector, a range of organisations that work with him, and John Widdowson, who has finished as president of the Association of Colleges, but is the head of New College at Durham, which is one of my favourite examples of FE that's involved in higher education. So we'll start off with FE. John, your comments and quick reactions to this.
Yeah, I think that it's the point that Mark was making at the end around all of this, actually around uncertainty, and whether that actually just creates a planning blight, or whether the things that we can do in that interim period. And I think obviously if we choose to be blighted, then not a lot's going to happen. So I do think there are opportunities, but trying to formulate them in a way that gives us certainty about sustainability in a period of change, I think is going to be very difficult. Going to your point, Neil, about the links of European campuses, as an institution, we have a lot of links across Europe, and we're already thinking about turning the thing inside out. We had students coming from Europe to do top-up degrees in England. We're now thinking we might have to do that the other way around, and to do that sooner rather than later to establish that base. It also gives us flexibility over pricing, which we currently don't have with EU nationals. So there are some opportunities. I wouldn't say it's a great opportunity, but there are things there that are possible. I think if we go back to what Iain said at the start, really, about looking at what's happening in a systematic way and viewing the whole higher skills, higher education system. Yesterday we had a little bit of debate about what is higher education, what isn't. But making sure that we look at this as a system issue and not just fragmented parts of that system. So linking again to Gordon's point about, if you like, the supply chain from earlier on, and the impact of changes in the school curriculum on progression pathways and what students may or may not be able to do. That, to me, are the key issues that we can focus on and we can get some traction. And maybe, if government gets totally absorbed in Brexit and parliamentarians like Iain have to read even more documents to do with Brexit and Europe, maybe we can get some space where there'll be less legislation in the educational field, so we can actually get on and sustain the models that we've got.
Okay, Alex, what's your take on and your members? Because you also have some members who are very much involved with pathways into university, and the economics of all of that must be quite interesting.
That's right, yeah. I mean, we have both higher education institutions, but also providers of higher education pathways, as you mentioned. I mean, I think my big sort of takeaway on what's happening with the Higher Education and Research Bill and other reforms, for us, it's not, I mean, as Iain talked about, it's not about new universities starting up from scratch in the main. It's about the fact that these institutions are already here. There are, at best estimates, over 700 independent providers of higher education in the UK, most of them very small, around half of them under 100 students. They're already here. There's up to 300,000 students studying them at any one time in the UK. And what we hope the Higher Education and Research Bill will do, we hope what the Office of Students will do, is actually bring sort of clear and consistent and transparent regulation to this sector for the benefit of students and for the benefit of providers. In terms of other issues that are happening at the moment, I mean, Brexit is a concern to us. It's not as much of a concern as it is to research-intensive universities. But some of our members have around a third of their students from the EU. So they will face a potentially dramatic sort of restructuring of their student population, their recruitment patterns. Unfortunately, what the UK will find is that these sort of companies, as with any sort of successful company in the world today, they are internationally mobile. And already we're seeing investment that would have gone into the UK in establishing new campuses and in expanding current provision being directed instead to the EU. We have members who are out there right now in Italy, in Germany, in France, setting up new campuses so that they can take advantage of continued membership of the EU, both in terms of those sort of engagement with research programs, engagement with the sort of cross-national programs, but also take advantage of far more favourable international student regulations, and the EU is much more favourable towards non-EU students coming to study here. And I think, unfortunately, this may be the pattern we see across the sector over the next 10 years, assuming that Brexit does mean Brexit and what we expect it to mean. I think, unfortunately, investment, talent and opportunities will flow out of the UK towards the EU.
Okay. Can you push? Julie, what's your take on what kind of strategies and things are going to be adopted, how people are going to respond, not just to Brexit, but to, you know, changing higher education environment?
So I think I agree with everything that everybody has said so far, unsurprisingly. But the thing that I think I draw out of most of what we've discussed is the question of innovation. And I think Gordon sort of mentioned it earlier on, maybe Iain, it was yourself. You know, we've had an opportunity with the introduction of fees, with the introduction of new alternative providers, to really think differently about the way in which we deliver higher education in this sector. But actually, in general, it still takes 3 years. It still takes you to go off to a campus or a building somewhere to study. And actually, I think what you're starting to see with technology and with providers, not just in Europe, but globally, and I think the other point I would make is this is about a global play. You know, we play in the HE global market, not in the European market, actually. So it's about how do we innovate here in the UK to take the opportunity of the uncertainty I think that we have in the next few years. I'm someone who will apologise later, having tried something out, and if it didn't work, it didn't work. But actually, if we wait and wait and wait for the permission to do different things, to innovate, to try new ways of ensuring that we continue to be sustainable and grow and are relevant in a not just a European but a global marketplace, I think we miss a trick and an opportunity. The other thought that I had, we've done quite a bit of work looking at what keeps Vice Chancellors awake at night, and I think they're relevant whether Brexit happens or not. They are around the role of technology and how they innovate around technology and how they make sure technology is up to date, not just for students and making sure they've got Wi-Fi in their student accommodation, but actually to make sure that you've got the technology that you need to be leading edge, world class in terms of research as well. Costs keep going up, and the pressure on universities to actually think differently about their business model and how they manage the cost base. I think that will continue to be an issue. Income, you know, we're seeing, okay, with TEF, there might be an opportunity for some universities to increase their fee levels. But again, it was pointed out that with the changes in Europe, we don't know what that's going to mean for income. Some of the work that we've done, interestingly, looking at international student fees, the elasticity of those fees is not well understood by universities. So we offer bursaries and discounts for people who would have come anyway because the programs are oversubscribed. So really maximising income, I think at this time is going to be really important. Talent is another area, both in terms of the students, but also academic staff. And as someone rightly said, the attraction and the mobility, I think, of Generation X, Y, Z and beyond, of the world that they see as quite a small global place, that they can go where they want to, they can work where they want to, and they can live where they want to. I think that will continue. So I think the competition for that will be absolutely critical as well. And then the final point I would say, which just sort of came to mind, there's been quite a bit of research done around the 100-year life, how we're all going to live longer, we're going to have multiple careers, and we're going to have to reinvent ourselves many, many times. And I think, as again it was said, we still have a university system that is very much focused on the under-25s, when actually I think we're going to need to find alternative programs to degrees. So the role of business schools, I think, will become really interesting. The way in which business schools link to industry and faculty within the wider university. As Gordon said, you know, most of us consider ourselves as being part of a sector. You know, I'm probably the worst. I'm a management consultant, so that's probably tops estate agents and I don't know. But actually, I'm not a generic management consultant. I work in the HE sector. I see that as the industry that I understand and I know, and I think everybody does. So actually, helping universities' role in helping business to reinvent their employees, I think will become increasingly important. And actually universities creating employers, not just employees in the future, will become increasingly important.
Questions, contributions from the floor? Anybody like to ask? I'm very struck. I mean, how many people understood how many alternative providers there are already? I think you've got about 700. In the FE, the higher education, you've got 200 plus. Although Guild HE's members would regard themselves mostly as universities, but alternative ways of doing it. There is actually a huge alternative sector there. The alternative language has been a slight distortion, focusing on the College of the Humanities, etc. There's a huge amount to get on with. I mean, how many people, were people aware that there was that diversity inside the system that could be picked up now and run with, which would seem to be, you know, the first place to start. So any comment or reaction to what the panel have been saying? Shock and amazement? No?
Can I just make a comment? That diversity provides, because it's been in the FE sector for a long time, with a lot of private providers, and so things that I know will tax the system, like what do you do on institutional failure? Because it will happen. And not so much the financial consequences for the institution, but the students who come in. And then what the implications are of that for trust in the system as a whole. And we've had examples of our institutions have had to find alternative places, usually through, you know, withdrawal of Tier 4 approvals for overseas students. That will be as nothing compared with employers who find themselves without students with somewhere to go because of an institutional failure, where we find highly speculative ventures are done on the back of student loans or student subscriptions. So I think we've got a whole new ethos, a whole new set of ethics actually in the system to think about. We've already seen it in the FE sector where there has been failure of private training providers, and there has been an attempt by government to try and create critical mass, you know, with minimum levels of contract value and so on. The levy, that we haven't really talked about a lot, puts all that back into play.
And Iain, have you and your colleagues been, I mean, you picked up that risk element of starting institutions from scratch, but even within the current ecology of colleges and things, there has been failure and things. Has that been on a parliamentary radar?
Yeah, we undertook an inquiry about the Teaching Excellence Framework. It was actually accessing quality in higher education, that was the formal title. And we touched upon one of the things that I tried to mention this morning, which is, you know, we have got, you know, this really great diverse sector already. And we risk that at our peril, to be honest. And I don't think anybody would argue with the idea of assessing teaching quality and making sure that everyone receives an excellent service, especially when they're spending quite so much money. One of the risks that we wanted the government to look at and address directly to Joe Johnson is there is a risk that actually having a teaching excellence framework means that we become more homogenous as a sector, because people will move away from not risky areas, but if you've gone down if your department has gone down a route where it's seen as unsatisfactory, what will the Vice-Chancellor do? They'll cut that funding straight away. And then you'll just get this sort of beige of HE, and we lose that sort of sparkling palette that we've got at the moment. And again, I think we look back in 20 or 30 years' time and think, we've really missed a trick. So how do you maintain that diversity whilst at the same time addressing the technological, the demographic, the innovative changes, and, as I tried to mention also, that you've still got people under the age of 25 going to a residential area for 3 years to do an undergraduate degree, when actually the forces at play mean that we need to change that.
Quick question.
Mike Moreland, Dean of the Business School at London South Bank. I think diversity does bring with it the risk of institutional failure. And, you know, we embrace the idea of a free market. I don't think we have a free market in higher education because we don't really have clear information to inform that market, but we haven't really thought about how we pick up the mess of the, you know, when the free market actually results in failure. But actually my point was a different one, and it's to pick up the point about TEF, because somehow the discussion about TEF seems to have morphed into a discussion about unsatisfactory teaching. And if you look back in some of the paperwork on TEF, it was actually about a fear that universities were putting too much emphasis on research and not enough emphasis on teaching. Not that the teaching was necessarily bad, but that the balance wasn't right. And I think there's a real danger that we'll talk ourselves into an idea that somehow we've got terrible teaching going on in universities and that TEF will sort it out. And I think that's a very dangerous assumption. I'm not necessarily saying anyone on the panel is making that assumption, but that's the kind of background noise that's going on. And the question I would ask is, what measures are there in TEF that introduce a new assessment of teaching? Does it involve anyone walking to any classroom in any university to look at what's going on? Or is it just a metadata exercise that will actually strengthen and enforce the kind of league table mentality we have at the moment? And so the usual suspects will rise to the top and the usual suspects will be towards the bottom. And in relation to that, I was very struck by the slide about Southampton Solent, which is a very good university, doing extremely good things. And whilst you were speaking, I just checked. Let's have a look at where Southampton Solent is in the Complete University Guide. It's number 115. And so there's a disconnect between what we say we value in the education sector and what's actually been measured in league tables. And that's a discussion that's not really taking place. So there's still a degree of doublespeak here about what universities should be doing and what we value, and then what people actually recognise as a good university.
Okay.
Could I just respond?
Yep.
Is that okay? Because just respond in two ways if I can to that. One is, I think in respect of, what is the problem that TEF's trying to sort, which is where I think we need to come from. I think the minister, who's a good minister, he's the nice and decent Johnson, actually, that he set the framework in a really bad way, because he mentioned in a speech about lamentable teaching. And when he came before the select committee, I said, tell us about lamentable teaching. And he tried to reel back from that. But that was the narrative that was set. How are you going to address through a TEF lamentable teaching when all indications are that that is not the case? We've tried to, on the select committee's report, and to be fair to the government, they've sort of tried to slow it. We've tried to say, in terms of some of the quantitative measures that the government was putting in place, graduate employment salary levels, that's just ridiculous. That doesn't tell you anything about teaching. Where we are here, a graduate here, going perhaps into the city, will earn very different salaries to a graduate at the University of Teesside who comes from my constituency. Does that say anything about the teaching? Or does that say something about access to opportunity and to local economic measures? So I think moving away from that quantitative measure, that metadata, as you said, towards more qualitative measures, I think is the way to go. I certainly want to see teaching assessed. I want it to be scrutinised, but I think the manner in which the government did it just set the narrative that was unfortunate.
Just a comment.
Good morning, Professor Adam Ramini from Birmingham City University. Interesting comments. I just want to add a couple of points. Just picking up on the last point, maybe we should look at the whole matrix in terms of the criteria of how we're measuring universities going forward. But also, I want to know what government is doing in terms of encouraging collaboration across institutions, between the FE and the universities, because we have these silo institutes at the moment, and we have many of them for many years, offering different types of degree, different professions. I've seen recently a degree that came out in MSc Enterprise Systems, offered by 3 universities of UCL, Brunel, and I think it's Southampton, I'm not sure, the third one, but supported by 5 enterprises from BAE and Rolls-Royce and so on. So, and it's a 1 to 5 year program, and it's linked to apprenticeship levy. So for the first time, I've seen 3 universities collaborating together, working with industry. So cross-collaboration of the university and cross-collaboration of the industries, which is going to benefit our talents, are going through that program a lot. And I want to know what government is doing in terms of encouraging collaboration between universities and FE colleges.
Okay. Let's take another comment and then I'll ask for some more. Yep.
Okay, I'm Peter Lorange from, I'm honorary president of SEEPS in Shanghai. And it seems to me that we have talked a lot about the UK versus and what's happening with Brexit versus the rest of Europe. But if we look at this from perhaps another level, it seems fairly clear that the people who are marching ahead are in Asia. That's where we are losing out. I mean, if you go 20 years back, it was all the US. Then we had our heydays in the UK. And now with Brexit, and before Brexit, and the Asians are just very happy to see what's happening. And, you know, after all, 1/4 of the world's population is in China. That's where the action is. And I think, I'm just asking you, but it strikes me slightly irrelevant what I've been hearing so far.
Okay. Well, let's just respond to some of those bits. John, do you want to pick up on some of the FE and collaboration?
I thought you might ask me now, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that at the moment it's far too variable. So you have some universities that are making strategic decisions, no, we're not going to collaborate anymore, and actually pulling in those links. And I won't name them, but they're fairly close to home for me. So that causes disruption in the system. So I think we need that commitment. I think if I was to get any hope from the machinery of government changes, it would be that now there is an opportunity within government, and I guess Iain's committee has something to do about asking the question, which has already started, about, well, as you are now in the same department, surely you can make those links. I have to say, as chair of an organisation, the Mixed Economy Group of Colleges, that does straddle HE and FE, we're constantly falling between the two stools of funding bodies and others saying, that actually isn't within our remit, go and talk to them, and you get the same answer. And that's really bedeviling, I think, developments around higher level skills, because it's not at all clear where they sit. Employers don't care. Employers can't understand. Employers don't actually grade their skill sets in level 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 as we do, and trying to explain that to employers, I'm sure many people in the audience have done that, is absolutely pointless and fruitless. And indeed, in many cases with higher apprenticeships, you need bits from different levels to satisfy the employer need. So we need to have that debate in a much more open way, not get it tied down by bureaucracy and territorial disputes between, dare I say it, God and civil servants from your past life, because that tends to be too much the flavour and it holds us back. And it also links in to the gentleman's point about the Asian market. The more cohesive a model we can present, the more chance we have of gaining business there. The more fragmented, the less likely they are to come along, because they just won't understand it.
Okay, I'm going to bring this session to an end, and I'd like you to join me in thanking all our speakers for their contributions, and all the material will be available on the web within about 2 days. But can you join me in thanking everybody who's taken part in the panel? Thanks very much.